Well, that being said, now that we've got that out of the way, and I'm sure we'll engender some sort of, mouth vomiting from other people, let's get right into the main topic today. Is going to be woman in refrigerators tropes. Now, for those who don't know, this was a term coined by comic book writer Gail Simone in the late 90s. I believe 1999 is when her website went live. And in my research of it, I found a couple different definitions or what it actually means. So I'll borrow at least three of them really quickly, give you a quick overview, and then I'll toss it to Andrew to start what he thinks about it. So women in refrigerators, this one according to Comic Vine, a term created by Gail Simone, women in refrigerators, refers to comic book women who have been depowered, raped, murdered, and or had their lives ruined specifically in order to fuel the stories of men. The Wikipedia page has something similar. It states that the Gail's website features comic book characters that have been injured, killed, depowered as a plot device within various superhero comic books and seeks to analyze why these plot devices are used disproportionately on female characters. And if you go directly to Gail's website, she actually doesn't offer any kind of real definition that I could find other than, if I could pull it up, her proposal, super chicks get killed a lot. So that's the general idea of what this trope or what this category is. So let's throw out, Andrew, we'll start with you. Just give me your first impression when you first heard about this, and then what have you found as you looked into it?
Yeah, so I think in general with a lot of comic tropes, looking at it, initially I have to, I look at it with some skepticism, but I also feel like there is a kernel of truth involved. So having said that, looking into this a little bit further, there's really like two versions of the women in refrigerators. There is, I think, what Gail Simone originally posed, which is really just a question for discussion, right? This is the start of a conversation, is what she intended it as. Obviously, Gail has her stance, but I think she wanted it as kind of a part of a bigger conversation. This is what I think. What do you guys think? And then you also have kind of where follow-on people have taken it as, this is fact. This is happening. This is the way things are. And I think Gail's intention is a really good starting place. I think trying to take this argument as fact, that this is this is an all the time, to borrow from science. This is a theory. This is a proven law of comic books. Mm-hmm. That really just doesn't hold up very well.
All right, Tracy, go ahead.
So, absolutely, Andrew is correct that this from Gail, it was more of a conversation piece, and she put on her website. She said, "My main point is, if you demolish most of the characters that girls like, then girls won't want to read comics. That's it. Or girls won't read comics. That's it." So her point is that a lot of these women, and there's quite a heavy-duty list of women in at various power levels and in various relationships with other characters that really get the shaft as far as violence towards them goes. I have to say that my initial response when I read this from Gail Simone was, why are the characters that girls like only allowed to be women? Mm-hmm. So I was curious about, and again, that's just a conversational question. Like, where are you going forward in this? And then as I delved into it, I noticed that from the response from feminists was to run down a whole list of what they gave as facts. And I saw, especially Anita Sarkeesian did a video on this. It's her Women in Tropes #2, I think, on her video.
I have it right here. Yes, there's Women in Refrigerators, Tropes versus Women, #2.
There you go. Yep.
This is from 2011, excuse me. So this is before she kind of hit it big in scare quotes, going after video games.
I think this list, I believe it was this YouTube, I believe it was this YouTube series that kind of made her something of a celebrity as far as feminism goes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, within her clique, yes.
Yeah.
I don't think the wider world knew who she was until Gamergate.
No, definitely not. Her and her eyebrows.
Hoop earrings.
I mean, she's not my favorite person. I'm gonna straight up say, but her commentary is very sensationalized, but her underlying facts aren't wrong. So like Andrew was saying, there is a kernel of truth. So I think that she may have been comparing examples that aren't equal. However, the point that I really pulled out of her video and started as I continued to read up on this, that I really pulled out and that I'd like to discuss with you guys is that the men tend to seem to die in a blaze of glory. They're headed to Valhalla. And the women tend to die off screen quietly and are found by a guy. And I also think that this is side characters, but you see this mostly with the women.
So I want to double back on one question to ask you, Tracy. And Gail says this in her about page, I think it is, she says something to the effect of, having a uterus myself, I found that I most enjoyed reading about girl heroes or super chicks. And it has been nagging me for a while that in mainstream comics, being a girl superhero meant inevitably being killed, maimed, or depowered, it seemed. So, Tracy, you kind of hit upon it, like, why would you assume girls like only girl superheroes? But let me ask you this question, and it may not be fair directing it towards you, but let's pretend and she also says, I should preface this one more time, she mentions again early on, I tend to like, this is Gail again, I tend to like bright, shiny heroes the best. When comic books went grim and gritty a while back, that was a period where comics had lost their appeal for me. So part of me feels like in that one sentence, she's kind of betrayed her early bias.
Yeah.
But my question to you is then, all things being equal, with the exception of changing female characters getting diced, as it were, do you think female readers would increase or stay the same, or they would like it more? Meaning that if the violence level in comic books stayed the same, but the female characters just weren't on the receiving end of it, how do you think girls would respond to that then?
See, and that's a funny thing, because literally the next thing I have in my notes is, if women got equal brutal, heroic deaths on screen as frequently as males did, would the average female or feminist finally be happy? I think it depends on who you are. So for me as a girl, I always identified with whoever the strong hero was in the story. It didn't matter if they were male or female. Now, outside of the realm of comic books, Robin McKinley would create these insanely heroic female warriors. I mean, they were strong. They didn't make stupid mistakes. They had flaws, but they were human flaws. They weren't female flaws. And I really identified very powerfully with her heroes. The Blue Sword, the Hero in the Crown, Beauty, I mean, the list goes, Doeskin, whatever book you want to read from her, that's what she created. But then at the same time, I would read, I don't know, Howard Pyle's Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, and I never identified with Maid Marian. She was annoying and boring. I identified with Robin Hood himself. He was the hero of the story. So for me as a reader, I identify with the powerful, shining hero. I don't identify necessarily with the gender of the character.
Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah. I would say currently I think the changing readership in comics does support that to some extent, right? There is a much, again, I mean, it is still tends to be a more male-dominated audience, but there has been significant growth in females, and specifically in younger females. And it's not that the female characters are getting beat up less than the males, but they tend to be more of that heroic instead of Gail at one point describes it as, I think this is in the Comics Alliance interview, where females stop being heroes and we're just basically fighting for survival.
Mm-hmm.
Right, where the characters, even in their own books, it wasn't about being a hero and doing heroic things. It was about just trying to not be murdered, basically. And I think that now that there's been a somewhat conscious shift towards the female characters being more heroic, I think you have seen an increase in the female readership, even at the current level of violence. I don't think the violence in and of itself is the problem.
So you don't think this is an anti-violence or anti-violence against women statement? Either of you?
I think there's a little bit to the anti-violence against women, but I think, again, especially just coming from what I've read from Gail, it's fine if women can get their ass kicked too. I think it's the motive and the reason behind it.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think? Let's go back to Andrew then. So what do you think the harm is, if any? If the motive and reason is these female characters are getting wiped out, be they superheroes or not, and that's another distinction I think should be made, is in the original Women in Refrigerators, she clearly says super chicks. However, as Tracy points out, when people take it as fact that this is true, they added a bunch of ancillary non-hero, non-combatant characters. So let's, for now, just stick with the superheroes and ignore the non-combatants. We can come back to them later if you want. But I was just curious what your... Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say it's funny you mentioned because the two that people tend to point to most are Gwen Stacy and
Alex DeWitt.
Alex DeWitt, Green Lantern's girlfriend, and yeah, like you said, those are both not heroes, non-combatants.
Mm-hmm.
Right, they're non-combatants. So I don't even think for now we shouldn't even talk about it. But my question is, do you think there's a harm there? Do you think, when I first heard this, and actually the first person that brought it to my mind was into my field was I saw the Nita Sarkeesian video. My first reaction was, so what's the actual issue? What's the problem? Where is there a problem? Can we identify an actual problem? Is there harm? I'll send that to Andrew first. Do you think that's the case?
I think there has been harm done in the past. I think it is much less of an issue currently. I mean, there are certain characters. The one that pops to my head first is Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, where just really fucked up shit has happened to her, especially for like an American comic. Like, this is, honest to God, this is the kind of stuff I would expect to see in some of your European stuff, like Druna.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, right. I know you might appreciate it, but like for the average comic book reader, this is really like kind of messed up stuff. That's and I think, you know, for a long time, basically the character was actually. I mean, it's hard talking about a character suffering harm because obviously a character, they're not real. So harm is a loose term.
Well, no. Let me clarify. I'm sorry. I'm not saying harm to the character because this is not actual violence. Penn Jillette always likes to point out there is artistic depiction of violence. Right. Yes. This is not violence. This is artistic depiction against violence. But I'm saying harm to the readers. I think the listeners would know. You're fairly read up on the 1950s trials that comic books went through in front of the Senate. Right. That this was corrupting a generation. Is this basically the same argument redressed? Can we find harm to female readers because these characters are getting throttled at such a high click, or the claim is that they're getting throttled at a high click? I don't know if that's been established yet.
Right, and that's a fair point to make. And that's actually something you and I are currently working on. It was a much more daunting task than certainly you realized, and even I had a better idea than you did, but I think we were both like, oh crap.
Yeah.
We started looking at the actual like numbers we need to figure out here, but harm to the reader, I don't think so. Honestly, I don't think there's harm to the reader. I think the harm I think is to the industry. In that you have readers who become disenfranchised. They feel that the characters that they most connect with and who are representative of them. So I understand Tracy's argument that, you know, women or Tracy's argument that women don't just only like women, right? Like that's not just that women aren't just looking for women characters to be interested in, and that's absolutely true. But I think, you know, it's helpful. You know, you tend to relate to people who look like you, who act like, you know. So when you start removing those characters or really terrible things keep happening to those characters, you say, well, kind of what's the point? So I realistically, I think the industry's had done itself far more harm than to the reader. I don't think the reader in and of themselves is really having any harm done to them other than losing interest in something that they once enjoyed.
Go ahead, Tracy.
I also have to point out that something that doesn't seem to come up so much in the sort of feminist argument, but did come up in some of the creator responses to Gail Simone. So if you go to Gail Simone's website, there's a whole section in which people have emailed or had conversations with her, and she records the response from writers and artists in the industry to her initial question. And what one of them, I believe it was Jerry Conway, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but did not he create Punisher?
Yes, Jerry
Isn't
Conway
it
did
Jerry
create.
Conway? Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, one of the arguably more violent characters in the Marvel universe.
Especially Punisher
says,
Max. Holy
right,
shit.
Right.
Love
so
that book.
he points out that you should not underestimate the power of lazy writing. And for a lazy writer, the easiest way to manipulate a female character or to, I mean, for a man, one of the worst things that you can do is beat him up and leave him
emasculated.
Basically beaten, emasculated. But for a woman, that is rape. I mean, it's just clear. That's the answer. So for a lazy writer, you're going to go straight for the jugular. You're going to go straight for the very worst. If you want to develop a character, you're going to go for the worst, which for a woman is rape. So you're going to see female characters in poor writing raped. And I thought, now that's an interesting point. And this feeds directly into what Andrew just said, that it's doing harm to the industry.
So here's what's interesting about this, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine earlier, is a friend of mine had brought up that it's not necessarily a sexism problem, but a lazy writing problem. And as someone who does not read mainstream comics much at all, I kind of had to analyze this from a very different direction, and I think we'll get into it later. Fans of Marvel and DC might get stuck in the details and not be able to pull back and see the broader arguments or semi-arguments. I don't even think we've got something you can call an argument, but if you're telling me that comic book writers are lazy or unimaginative in certain story aspects, I mean, really stop the presses. This is not something that needs to be sung from the highest mountaintops, because I think most of us knew this already. Most of us already knew that this is not
the pinnacle of the American
No,
novel.
this is not surprising. It's like, this is like, oh, okay.
Well, no, but I think you need to look at that within the industry in terms of, right? Nobody's comparing, you know, kind of a science fiction novel of this point, you know, or nobody compares pulp novels to Shakespeare, but there's good pulp novels and there's bad pulp novels.
Yeah.
Right? There's good comics and there's bad comics, and you can have the intermediate.
Well, there's quality, yes, but we're talking about, at least I'm trying to get at basic story structures and how they're told. At least with superheroes, the way I understand it is, yeah, you're going to get within genres, any genre, certain aspects that appear over and over and over again. And one of them that you get in comic books is the revenge plot, right? And Tracy hits on it perfectly, is, okay, if you have a character that you want to motivate to seek revenge for a wrong, usually the way you do that is you kill his family or her family. And we can go down a litany of characters that have happened to. And as she said, the worst thing you do to a male character is beat him up and take everything away from him. And that all of a sudden becomes the character's motivation. And if it's bad enough, the reader goes along with, oh yeah, that was pretty bad. I'd become a superhero too. If it's less than that, and I guess we'll start with Tracy on this one. If it's less than that, then what's the point? How do you then motivate a character?
Well, the point is agency. Each character has, in human life, we all do not have any real power over what happens to us. I'm talking about the drunk driver that comes across an intersection and hits our car. I'm talking about the mugging that happens on the street. I'm talking about the things that happen to us that we really have no control over. What we do have is the agency to respond correctly. And this goes back to more what Gail said and not so much what the follow-up arguments have said. And that is that for these side characters, and in this particular case, these women, these things are happening to them, and then they get no say in what the response is. It's all to motivate another character, usually a male character. So if you're a good writer, you've got a sort of this webbing of responses. So the person that it was enacted on responds unless they're dead. And then you have the main character that interacts with that. And then you have, the bad guy, whoever perpetrated the wrong. And so you've got all of this agency, these individual people responding to what happened. But a lazy writer or a poor writer, or in some cases, someone who's just sort of following a trend of writing, all they do is have a single person's response to it. So that would be my response, that you need to make sure that all of your characters, and this just goes back to good writing, make sure that all of your characters have some kind of response. Not because I think that that's a feminist thing, I just think that's a good writing thing.
Okay, so let's go to, she talked about super chicks, but now these characters, at least in the Comic Vine's definition, talked about female characters that get taken down to add to a male character's role. Usually, at least it appears to me, that the male characters are the primary protagonists of these particular stories, that the female characters that get killed are not the main source, or even not the main characters, not the main protagonists. So in violent books or stories that are violent and have characters that get taken out, wouldn't one expect all characters of all types, including women's, to get taken down to advance the protagonist story, be it whatever gender it is? And what's the big deal if it is a woman? Because I'm certain we could find male characters that get killed at a fairly high clip in male protagonist stories for the very same reason. Andrew, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the things on that one, you talk about, males who get taken up in male stories.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, you're not wrong that exists. I mean, the best example, Uncle Ben in Spider-Man, right? Uncle Ben dies, so Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. But I think part of the issue is, one, it's almost always love interests. Not always, but often it's a love interest. So that I think that takes on a different role. You're not a person. They're not characters in and of themselves. The characters are wholly dependent on the protagonist of the story.
Right.
Well, I think that's the issue, right? You can have an ancillary character whose existence is not dependent upon the protagonist.
Right. So, can you explain why you think that's an issue?
I mean,
because let me come back for 1 second. It's like, yeah, you have characters that are solely dependent on A, the protagonist, and B, the storyline. And in order to move a storyline forward, if you want a violent storyline, you're going to have to kill a few characters. So you will create characters for the sole purpose of killing them, because that's what your story entails. So my question then is, why is that a problem, if it is a problem?
I mean, in general,
Tracy,
in general, I kind of take issue with that. And again, I don't know if it's lazy storytelling, but if I'm sitting here, so like when we saw Suicide Squad,
mm-hmm.
right? Slipknot was there to die.
Yep.
Right. You and I both said, why the fuck was the character there in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's the same thing, except in this argument, it's primarily female love interests.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You can have characters can exist kind of to die, but if literally all they're there in the story to, if their only contribution to the story is dying, why are they there?
Well, I mean, isn't that it? I mean, we can like it or not, but can't a character's purpose be there to be killed? Let's take, Red Viper from Game of Thrones. I think when we first chatted about taking on this topic, it felt like his purpose in that storyline was to get his head crushed in Game of Thrones so Tyrion can go east. That was we had to get him to go east to expand his story, so that's why Red Viper had to lose that fight. So if they are designed for that purpose, I don't see that as a problem. Andrew, or Tracy, do you want to pick that up? Or
I feel that again with the Red Viper, the character added more than just dying.
That's what I was going to say. He had his own additional purpose for living.
Right.
You could almost say that his sister was there just to die.
Right. He was there to avenge his sister. He had a reason for doing what he was doing. Yes, he was in the plot to die.
Mm-hmm.
But there was more to him than just, I'm here and squish.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
and
very well said.
Oftentimes, that ends up being, especially less with the female superheroes, and more with the ancillary characters. So Alex DeWitt was introduced and then killed 4 issues later.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't think anyone cared about the character other than, hey, we're killing Green Lantern. People care about her now more because of the women in refrigerators idea than they ever would have cared about her as an actual character. but her sole purpose was to be introduced and then die. Right? She brought nothing else to the story, and I think that's where I have an issue. I have no problem with killing off characters. I mean, I may be sad because I like characters. You know, if they kill off someone I like, but I have no problem killing someone off if they've done more than just stand there waiting to die.
Good. And Tracy, you want to add to that? Because I think what we're going to do next now is actually really...
Next, we're going to start killing people off.
Yeah, we should. I mean, look...
We're going to start killing people off and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, Tracy, I want you just to add to any... Or come back on any of that, because I think the next thing I want to jump into is even if this women refrigerators thing actually exists, because I've spotted two very big problems with it. But go ahead. If you want to add anything.
One of the things that I do want to add is just that Jerry Conway also mentioned that there has been a significant uptick in the level of violence in comic books, and he attributes it, to the increase in violence in other forms of entertainment as well, in video games and comic books. I am not saying that violence in entertainment begets violence in real life. I am saying that one form of entertainment becomes more violent and it sort of trickles into other forms. Mm-hmm. Society as a whole is very desensitized to artistic depictions of violence in entertainment, and not in my opinion, not in a little part because MPA ratings move more based on sexual content and literally the number of some specific expletives than the amount of violence in a movie. So
sure.
I think that overall what type of violence happens has increased, and I think that it really would behoove a lot of comic artists to move beyond the death of a family member, rape of a female, in order to motivate their characters. There are other things that can push you over the edge.
Well, so
okay.
One last.
Well, can you just name like two before you do that? I just want. She brought it up. There are more things. Give me a couple examples.
Of
what can?
Of
other types.
Yeah,
other
just
give me a couple examples. Yeah.
I mean, it can be big things in that. It could be something as small as a character looks around and decides they want a better life. It could be a freaking spider bite. It could be a car accident where nobody dies that was enacted on them. They could perpetrate some type of violence. They could, there could be some kind of a wreck where they suddenly realize that they themselves are a terrible person and need to shape up. I mean, there are lots of things that happen in an average human's life that make them change. And I think that it would be really nice to explore some of those things.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there are more things that would be described as a quote-unquote come to Jesus moment than just rape and death.
Yes.
Right. There are more, but can you think of any that are more dramatic or more shocking?
But at the same time, why do we have to go to the extreme?
Because
that doesn't happen in real life.
No, it doesn't. But if that's the kind of book you want to write,
well, sure. So again, I think there's a little bit of an assumption here that you have to go to the extreme every time, right? I think that's part of the argument is that at least the theory is the thought is that writers are constantly going to the extreme with these characters, mm-hmm. right? There's no. You can motivate the characters without going to the absolute utmost. I mean, yeah, sure, that is sometimes.
No, you certainly can. Yes,
that's true.
That is sometimes
that is sometimes required, right? I mean, mm-hmm. rape, murdered, yeah, the whole night, like that is sometimes required, but not all the time. And I think that's the point that people are trying to make is that that we tend to be swinging very far. The pendulum's going really far for something that doesn't need nearly that much momentum.
So, that being said, one of my two main problems with this one, because I don't know enough about comic books, and like you said, we're working on this project, we're going to actually quantify what she says, Gail says, or the other people who have taken this women refrigerators and run with it. She makes two premises, or two specific claims. One, she says the percentages are off. If there are 50 major female superheroes and 40 of them get killed, maimed, or depowered, that's more significant numerically than if 40 male characters get killed, since there are many times more that total. And B, I can't quite shake the feeling that male characters tend to die differently than female ones, kind of echoing what Tracy said early on. Now, I haven't any way of knowing whether the second premise is true or not. We're just guessing at this point. We don't know if that's the case or not. These female characters are not dying heroically, are dying off panel, versus the number of male characters that are or aren't. There was no way of quantifying that at all, that at least that I could find. It was just kind of an assumption with a few examples. The other one was the percentage of major female superheroes killed vice their number. In other words, that, yeah, even if the percentages are the same, let's say 50% of major female superheroes are killed and 50% of male superheroes are killed, by volume, the female numbers would still be higher because there's so few of them. That's another thing we can't substantiate. We just don't know. In her list, she doesn't offer, and she offers about 111 characters that have been killed, maimed, raped, burned up, or depowered, but we don't have the number of female characters total. Let's start with Tracy. Does that kind of at least get you to start questioning this a little bit, that, could this premise necessarily not be the case? Might just be an assumption, a gut instinct, without having any hard numbers to check?
My gut instinct is that this is an actual issue. The idea that characters without agency are created and killed off just in order, or maimed, raped, whatever. Violence is done to them just in order to progress the storyline without adding anything else. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's the case. I mean, just over the course of almost 30 years of taking in entertainment. Yeah, it really does happen. But again, for me, the big thing, the point that Anita pointed out, and I have to say that I agree with, is that I want these characters, if they really have any true agency in the story, for the superheroines, I want their death on screen. Like one of the ones that they pointed out was Mr. Miracle's wife, Big Berta,
Big Barda.
something, Big Barda. How she didn't go out in a blaze of glory. This is not Boromir dying with 3 arrows in his chest protecting the hobbits. She just is on the kitchen floor and her husband comes home and finds her. Really, I want the bright, shining hero. I don't care if it's female, I don't care if it's male, but if she's going to be the hero of her own story, let her die especially if it's against bad guys, let her at least, give her the respect to show it happen.
I took notes on Big Barda since you brought it up. So Big Barda, character created in 1971, she's killed in 2008 in a series called Death of the New Gods. She's not the main character of that story. And from my understanding of it, she's not. And a ton of new gods are wiped out. Many of them male, many of them female, many of them off panel. Some are just given mention. Some are never shown. And she comes back. It's in the wiki list that we've referenced.
Yeah, she does come back, yes.
She comes back 2 issues later.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Though, I mean,
if you say so, but that's okay. Andrew, do you have anything?
So I would agree. I would agree with you on the first part. I think the statistics probably aren't going to back this up very, very dramatically. There might be a slight imbalance, but it's not. I don't think it's anywhere near what we think it is. Especially in the almost 20 years since Gail made this first started this. Things have changed a lot, and even at the time,
that is a good point.
Even at the time, I don't know, and that's actually something we're looking at, is how 1999 compares to 2016. I don't think the numbers are quite as dramatic as they're made out to be. I mean, that's just my gut feel. Actually, one of her responses, Fabian Nasia, I think I can never get that guy's last name right. It's one of the guys who co-created Deadpool. He basically says, "Hey, where's your statistics? Where's your numbers? Like, you come back to me with numbers and we can talk."
Right, and that's my second problem with this, is that she produced. So the first one is where does she say it? I'm trying to stick with what Gail says. I don't want to go into the weeds of what some of the feminists are saying, because it's a different argument altogether. They're 2 completely different arguments. One assumes the conclusion that women in refrigerators exists, and that runs the risk of doing the fallacy, begging the question, because we haven't established whether it's real or not. So for those who don't know,
it's the second paragraph under the response from creators.
Okay.
It talks about 50 major female superheroes and 40 of them killed.
Right, but she says somewhere, and I don't remember where, I think it might have been in the Comics Alliance interview, she was basically asking the question, why is it okay to kill female superheroes at such a high click? And my basic point is, I hope
it's actually that same section.
Same section? Okay.
Yeah, to quote, "It got me wondering, honestly, why was it okay, or even encouraged somewhat, to kill women more than men statistically?"
Right, so there's, okay, yes, I see it now. So the problem is we haven't established that, and that runs the risk of begging the question fallacy. And for those who don't know it, it's a fallacy form of arguing which one assumes that one claims. Oh, excuse me. Let me start again. A fallacy form of arguing in which one assumes that one claims to be proven. An argument is a form of reasoning. Oh, well, we already know an argument, but basically, it's an assumed conclusion. She's assumed that that's the case. We don't know that. And the other problem I have with it is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, which we've brought up before, is she writes up a list of 111 female characters that have been injured in all sorts of ways, with no comparison to the number of female characters that are ever created and are still alive versus male characters that have been created, killed, or have never been killed. So I don't know if we have a one-to-one comparison to really draw a conclusion.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I think when we do get the one-to-one comparison, I think the numbers won't quite come out as sharply as a lot of people think they will. Addressing the second part, when you're talking about them dying, less heroically or more horrifically, I think there is some weight to that.
Yeah, we'll have to. I mean, there might. I could be. I don't know. But it could very well be the case.
And that's just, again, that's my gut feeling, having read a lot of comics now, that watching or having read a lot of these, you tend to see male characters doing the blaze of glory or dying for the cause, and the women...
Characters or heroes?
Heroes.
I think heroes, okay.
I mean, if we're talking to just characters, then yeah, you've got the ancillary characters who don't really die for a whole lot of anything, period, but... you tend to get male heroes dying for the cause and going out gloriously, and you do tend to get more of the female character or female heroes, just having less glorious ends, shall we say? And then again, I mean that is my opinion, not necessarily backed up by numbers, and that's something we're looking into.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, I mentioned this topic to Kurt about just talking about what we were going to be talking about today, and his initial assumption, his gut reaction was, that's because comic books don't like to show violence against women. The type of person that reads a comic book really doesn't want to see violence against women. Do you guys think that that's an accurate response?
No.
I don't know, because there might be some grain of truth to this, because when I asked earlier, when Tracy was like, if all things remained equal, the level of violence stayed the same, but let's say we decreased the level of violence against women, and if female readership increased, then this is to say, if it holds true, that violence against men is not seen as a big deal. Yet we are fixated on this violence against women thing. Now that might not be the case. It might not be. I don't really know. I mean, me personally, if you're asking me directly, I just like comic books where everyone gets fucked up. I don't really care what they are, you're right. You don't have to go to the extreme, but I fucking love it when they do. And those are the kind of books I read.
I mean, let's be honest, the extreme can be really cool.
Right. Now, Gail, I think I mentioned it earlier, said she didn't care for that. She didn't like that. So you know what? That's, dog, you do you. That's you. You don't like that? Well, I'm okay with that too.
So I don't know that Gail doesn't like the extremes. I think she's talking about like the 90s when everything got extreme, like the pouches and all the gun. Like, I think that's what she's talking about when she's talking about comics she doesn't like.
Well, I'll say this much: we at least started digging through the numbers, and I got through DC characters that have died and stayed dead, and just glancing over it, just looking at the numbers without having charted everything, the vast majority of the characters that died were post 1985.
Yes,
and then there's a huge spike post like 2000.
Yeah, and I
So
would agree with both of those.
it appears, just looking over the numbers when I kind of sorted them out, the beatings continued until morale improved through the 80s. That's really what it looked like. And I'm almost certain that Marvel might be the same thing. But again, I only got a chance to dig into DC.
So I would suspect, and part of that is, the comic industry has been around for pushing 80 years now.
Yeah.
And trying to keep readership involved, especially, guys since the 60s. Comics have had a real hard time kind of pulling in new readership, and they've acknowledged as much in the last few years. But since they've had such a hard time, when you get the old curmudgeon, the guys have been reading comics for 20 years or God only knows how long, 20, 30, 40 years, there hits a point where they're like, okay, we've done this before. We've done this 6 times before. And I think that's where we're seeing like that spike in like killing off characters and stuff.
Yeah, and then coming back, that was the other thing, is the list that I looked at least that I worked on, was just characters that stayed dead. And there's a separate list of characters coming back. I mean, good God, it was such a big deal when Superman died, but then I found this character called Gog, G-O-G, I think it is.
Yep.
And doesn't he kill Superman 7 times in one issue? Like, he kills him, and then goes back in time 24 hours because he wasn't satisfied with the way he killed Superman, and then does it again. And then again, and then again, and then again. So yeah, it absolutely got ridiculous. And it's funny because I don't like to read superhero characters because I wish characters stayed dead.
Well, and that's exactly a point that I was going to bring up sort of towards the end, is that I would actually prefer a universe in which people may stay dead, but where death has equal consequences across the board, that there's some weight behind what's happening. Because I think even for these ancillary characters, they're trying to create some kind of a weighted death, a weighted pressure, so that you identify with the character that's now blossoming because his girlfriend was just put in a refrigerator, and it just doesn't have any consequence at all.
Oh no, I mean, Anita Sarkeesian brings up Gwen Stacy, and I looked into her, and there was some outrage in the 70s when she died.
Right.
And my response is good. There should be. Because I want characters to die, and I want fans to be upset. I'm always for upsetting fans. I'm always for that. But then I looked this up. So she dies, comes back as a clone in the 70s. There's a bunch of her, and now in the Ultimate Universe, there's a Spider-Gwen, a Gwenpool, and a Gwen Carnage. Am I reading this correctly? Did I look into it correctly?
Those last 3 are probably within the last year, though.
Okay.
Those are all 3 of those are pretty recent additions. Yeah, and the clones in the 70s. Spider-Man and clones is just don't dig into that one.
Right.
You will hate yourself for looking into that one. I mean, you're not wrong. That was a thing, but like, don't look into Spider-Man and clones. It just bad things happen.
And then she brings up Steph Brown, who is a Batgirl or a Batwoman.
Batgirl.
Dies in the 90s. We find out that death was faked, apparently. And then she gets her own book, and it's canceled after a few issues. And now she's back as of 2013 as the spoiler. So, I mean, that's kind of my issue, is we talk about them as if they're these permanent things, but Tracy brings up superheroes dying in comic books just ain't that big a deal. Because they die and they come back, big deal.
And that's certainly that's an entirely separate issue, where the fact that death really has no permanence or consequence anymore.
Right, and that feels to me as if, and come back at me if you can with this one, is if we're so worried about female characters being at least killed, because that's the numbers I have. I don't have numbers on being maimed or depowered, but killed. It's like, yeah, Big Barda died. She came back in 2 issues. Calm down. Yeah, and yes, maybe Steph Brown dies, but it appeared that no one was buying her book because the title was canceled. So that happens too. Sometimes the market just fades out the character. I don't see what. Again, I'm still of the opinion that I don't have any conclusive way to draw a conclusion. But my initial response is, so what's the problem here? Tracy, you want to start with that one?
Well, and this just goes back to basically my 2 arguments. The first one is that it doesn't have to be a death, and it doesn't have to be a rape in order for the character to be motivated or even to disappear. And the second thing is that this is, I don't know how to say this a little bit stronger than I originally did, but it's just really that the men are dying in a blaze of glory, and so frequently the women just aren't. They're just not given the same treatment. So I'd like to see equal treatment, and I would like to see consequences for what's going on.
Okay, I think that's a good final thought. Andrew, do you want to any final thoughts?
And I'm
on
actually just kind of curious, and I literally just had this thought. You're talking about the market taking over, and again, I think, the market needs to do what the market's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Characters will come and go as they are liked or not liked. I wonder though if there's some element of self-fulfilling prophecy in that, in terms of if you keep killing off these characters, like, oh, I'm going to kill them off and bring them back, kill them off, bring them back. At some point, people go, oh, well, what's the point? Why am I investing my money and my time? Especially because comics are $4 a fucking piece now.
Right.
Why am I investing my time and money into something they're just going to kill the character off and then bring her back in a dumb way?
Oh, that's been one of the reasons why I don't read them. But I don't think it has to do with at least female characters. I mean, what did someone told me this, that Batman had a time machine attached to his heart so that when he died, he would go somewhere else in time and then get reassembled. Was that a thing? Do you remember that?
I know I know conceptually what you're referring to, but I don't actually know I don't know like the mechanism. I didn't actually read.
Yeah,
like Batman coming back in time. He ended up dying and going back in time and coming back. I didn't bother reading that arc, so
because it does get goofy. That's the thing. We are talking about a really goofy art form here.
Well, it was also after Final Crisis, and I just kind of spent some staring at the books, going, "Oh, I don't understand."
Yo, Superboy Prime destroyed some people.
You're thinking Infinite Crisis, and yes.
Oh God, whatever. Jesus Christ.
Hang on. Final Crisis was written by Grant Morrison. Try wrapping your brain around that.
All right. So final thoughts. I guess for me, and I will tell you guys right now. So I found this really interesting, and I had the same reaction that one of the respondents had, is come back with some serious data, and then we'll talk. So that's what we're working on. Is I found a wiki page, and again, it's an incomplete page, but it actually seems a little more exhaustive than Gail's list of characters that died, when they died, what issue they were killed, and the manner in which they were killed. And then this is for Marvel, NDC, and a few others, but right now I'm just going to focus on the two kind of battleships of comic books right now. And then we've got another list of characters that died and came back. So the plan is to actually assess numbers behind some of the claims here, because like Andrew points out earlier, Gail just kind of throws the lore out into the water and just leaves it be, and it kind of mutated, and people took it to mean many, many different things without really looking at any kind of numbers. So claims like Tracy was bringing up, male characters dying in a blaze of glory versus dying off panel, or with female characters dying. I'd like to put that to the test. I'd like to find out if that's the case.
I would love to read
And then
that.
it's what are the body counts? How many major female characters die? How many minor female characters died? Vice the total number that actually exists. Or as far as the number of characters killed permanently, what percentage are female, what percentage are male? In a preliminary look, and again, my numbers aren't perfect because there were some Excel blips, but it looks like 60% of the characters that are killed and stay dead are male in some fashion, and it's about 20 the other way. And then there's weird shit in the middle, like I have it broken down by like male, female, non-human males, non-human females, and then one planet. I found one. I found one planet. I thought that was kind of funny. But so
Not
that was the
Tatooine,
thing.
I'm assuming.
No, who was this? What was this guy's name? I can
Mogo.
pull it up real. Hold on. Zip. Gender. I have it broken up by gender, but I have gender planet. Ranks the sentient planet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's,
Died in 2007.
Yeah, it was probably Sinestro Corps, I thought.
Yeah, I think he is part of the Sinestro Corps. I have him listed as a villain.
Yeah.
So We will find this out. I think this would be a good resource because the women in refrigerators list has been cited by a lot of people, but I think my hope here is that we can like put some serious numbers behind it and get some serious conclusions because one, I'm not 100% convinced this is an issue, and two, so what? I love fucking killing characters and making fans mad. The more the merrier.